Godleski, your emotional support American abroad, and I've moved abroad 3 times in the last 12 years. This is How to Move Abroad for people who don't need more inspiration, they need an actual decision and a checklist. Each week, I cut through the internet noise and walk you through the stuff that actually decides whether this happens or not. Every episode ends with a weekly task because collecting information isn't progress, and someday isn't a strategy. Let's get into it. All right, so we've picked our visa lane. We understand proof of funds. And if you haven't gotten there, go back in the episodes 2 and 3 and we'll get there. And then you have a better sense of what to DIY and what to pay for yourself and outsource. So now what? Well, now we do the part that actually controls your timeline because we're ready to actually start moving. Now we talk about paperwork, documents, receipts. This is the part people avoid because, number one, it's annoying and boring and it feels like a lot. And because it feels like a lot, you tend to put it off. And then 6 months go by and you're shocked that you can't get an appointment or you can't even get an apostille in time or your background check expires or your birth certificate is the wrong kind. So today we're doing what we do best here and we're going to build a document runway. Not for every country on earth, not for every visa type, for your lane and for your realistic shortlist that we've made already. If you do nothing else this month, do this. This is the difference between we're serious and we're just consuming content. So I want to make sure that we're all on the right track together. This is how we move abroad. We have to do paperwork. And as much as we don't want to, it's not avoidable. Here's what no one tells you when they're romanticizing the move abroad. A visa is not a vibe. It is 100% an application. And applications do not care how motivated you are. They care about the right documents in the right format, within the right time window, submitted in the right order, in the right color ink, and all the things that are not type B compliant. A lot of the documents you need are not instant. You have to plan for all of this shit. Some require processing time, some require mailing, some requiring you to show up in person, some require translations, some require apostilles, some expire. And that's why paperwork is your logical step. Not because it's fun, but because it's usually the biggest bottleneck in this whole process. Countries and cities and schools and neighborhoods can all wait. Paperwork cannot, because some of it takes a long, long time. So I want to give you a simple system for thinking about what documents you need so you stop feeling like this is random, because most visa applications end up pulling from the same buckets. Bucket 1 is your identity documents. These are things like passports, your birth certificate, that's for you and for everyone who's moving with you, your marriage certificate or your divorce decree if that's relevant, any name change documents that you have along the way. Those are your foundation documents. Every single country requires them. Every single country will need some level of those. Now, when they expire, how long they're good for, what they need to look like, what format that they're in, whether or not they need to be translated, all of those are different pieces depending on your country and your visa situation. But at a minimum, you're going to need those things, your passport, your birth certificate. If you're married or have been divorced, you'll need those documents. And if you've ever changed your name for whatever reason, you're going to need that as well. Bucket 2 are your background and legal documents. More than likely, you're going to need an FBI background check or state police check, depending on the country and the visa that you're going for. Sometimes a local police check is also required for all the places that you've lived. I have not encountered that yet, but I have heard people having that. And if you have some sort of conviction on your record, if you have some sort of issue with the law, you may need court records if relevant. This is where people get tripped up on timing and expiration windows because police certificates are usually good for 6 months from your application date. Not from the date that your visa gets approved, but from the day that you plan on applying. So if you're looking to apply in March of 2027, please do not already request your FBI background check today because it's not going to be good by then. If you know your timelines, this is how you start building, right? So if I'm planning to move abroad in March of 2027, I need to apply and get my FBI background check within 6 months of that so I can start requesting that in September of 26, for example. We talked about this a couple episodes ago, but if you need financial or income proof of funds, those are bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns, etc. You've done that already with us. Now you just have to gather the proof that's in a way that's clean and usable and accessible for people to understand. So you want to start, we talked about building that folder already, have that folder going so that you already have your proof of funds ready to go. Some countries require you to have health insurance, whether that's proof of health insurance now and to cover you until you actually get on their social system, Or, for example, here in Switzerland, we were required to have proof of health insurance that we already were, as of the day that we arrive, essentially, that we'll have health insurance coverage. Okay. That's what we needed to switch our visa, get into the country to a residence permit, was to make that switch on health insurance. Sometimes some countries do require vaccination records. Some of them require a health certificate to be performed. Of course, it's country and lane dependent, but especially health insurance is common. Whether or not you need vaccination and medical records, that's a little bit more uncommon, but it depends on the country. Some countries are going to require you to have proof of accommodation. In Austria, my husband could take us on as dependents and move him with us, he had to have a place for us to live. So, in other words, we had to rent an apartment before we were moving so that we would be able to have proof of accommodation. In some cases, you're allowed to show temporary accommodation. For example, when we moved to Switzerland, we had proof of accommodation as soon as we arrived at a temporary housing that was shown by a lease contract that we had. It was a 6-week short-term rental lease that we were able to show, look, we have a place to stay when we first arrived, and that gave us enough time to find a local place to move into. Those are going to be necessary in many cases. You're also, once you arrive, going to need registration paperwork. That sometimes happens before, that sometimes happens after. I know when I went, for example, to Bali last year in Indonesia, we had to have a visa upon arrival. Even if we already had a visa from the country, we had to fill out some arrival paperwork before we arrived. That may or may not be required. If you're moving with children, there are additional rules for children. Of course, you're going to need their birth certificates, just like you need yours and any partners moving with you. You may also need custody paperwork if that's applicable. If you have full sole custody of your child and are allowed to move them, you're going to need to be able to prove that. Some countries are going to require school records, especially if their cutoff years are different than your cutoff year in the country. For example, here in Switzerland, my daughter is at the cutoff at the end of July birthday. So everybody born August 1st and later automatically goes into the next year's school year. So in the United States, it's often in September or it's in October. And so you'll have to be able to prove via true school transcripts that your child can go into whatever grade they're going into that's appropriate for them. You may also need consent letters for travel in certain situations, especially if you are in a divorced situation or a separated situation where your child has custody you have shared custody with another parent and you're not all moving at the same time, that may be required as well. Of course, not everybody needs this bucket, but if you do, it really, really matters to pay attention. So that's documentation. The 3 things that people tend to mess up more often than most is because it can feel overwhelming. And it goes to, oh my God, what the hell am I supposed to get? We just talked about a whole list of documents that you might need, and it's going to depend on your visa on what you need. But if you grab the wrong version of the document, you're in trouble. So not all birth certificates are accepted. Some places want long form certificates. Some want a certified copy, not a photocopy. Some want an original issued within a certain time window. And that does not mean from birth. When we moved to Austria, I had to submit a birth certificate that was issued from each person within 6 months of our move. So for example, I was born in Germany, so I had to request the birth certificate from Germany and send it to Austria with a apostille stamp because yay me. For me, and I had to get a new one, even though I had one from 3 years prior. I had to get a brand new version of it. The same for my husband. He had to have it from where he was born in the United States. Fortunately, my daughter was born within 6 months of us moving, so it was really easy. But for everybody, we had to have the birth certificate that was within a certain amount of time. And it had to be either in English or in German. If you were born, for example, in Mexico and your birth certificate is in Spanish and not in English, you may either need to have one issued directly in English if it's available, or you may need to have it translated. So if you have the wrong version or the wrong language of the document, those are going to be big, big, big pieces that you have to look for. The next step is something that most Americans probably haven't even heard of before until you start your move abroad, which is apostilles or authentication. And this is where the US makes everything extra. Some countries require documents to be apostilled. That means you cannot just print something at home and call it a day. You have to get it certified, then apostilled by the correct authority. The apostille and the notary are not the same thing. Let me say that loud for the people in the back. An apostille stamp and a notary are not the same thing. The correct authority will issue the document correctly, and only the correct authority can issue it. And that depends on what kind of document you're looking for. If, for example, you need a new birth certificate with an apostille stamp, that's going to be typically requested from your Secretary of State's office. If you need a marriage license, that may be issued from the county office and not the state office. You still need to know what to do to get all of the apostilles correctly. This is why you start early and you can start researching. In the abroad program that I run, I do give you a list of everywhere that you can go to get apostilles. I give you all the details that is in a program that I run. I cannot give you all that information on a podcast, or else we would be sitting here and you'd be like, I'm bored, let me move on. But let me know if you need that detailed information in research and register. We go through all those details and make sure that you have everything that you need. We also talk about expiration windows because these are super important and things that mess people up all the time. Some documents expire for visa purposes. Background checks are a huge one. Bank statements usually have to be within 3 or 6 months, and medical certificates are often time-bound if they're required. So you cannot just gather everything at once and assume that they stay valid forever. You need a timeline. You need to look and plan when you're going to apply and then go backwards from there. Here's the process that I want you to follow. Once you know your visa lane, I want you to, and you know your target 1 or 2 countries, you cannot build paperwork for everywhere. So you need to pick your focus lane, pick your primary country and your backup country, and that's enough. Once you know those 2 things, once you know what your visa lane is and what country you're looking at, then you're going to look for the official document list. This is not a blog. This is not a Facebook comment. Find the official list from the consulate site, from the government immigration site, official guidance. If the list is vague, that's normal. You'll start with the common buckets we talked about at the beginning. Then you're going to make a document tracker. And I have one of these for you. I have a checklist that has all 100 things that you need to do to move abroad and when to do them, including the documents that you're going to need across the entire general world that everybody requires in general. So you can grab that. That's called Prepared AF because we need to be prepared as fuck to do all of this kind of stuff. I'll drop the links for that in the show notes. It's $20 or $27 actually. It comes with everything that you could possibly need to move abroad. It's really great. So many people love it. I get comments all the time from people about how great it is. If you want it, go into the show notes and grab it from me. If you have questions about it, DM me on Instagram. I'm sure to answer. What you need to create is a tracker, and I already have this created for you, is a document that you need, where you need it from, how long it'll take to get there. That's going to be something that'll depend on where you were born, so I don't have that information. But whether or not you need an apostille or a translation, and then if there's an expiration window associated with it. And yes, this is absolutely the most boring part, and it feels like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. But this is how people actually get abroad. You need to follow these things. You need to get the documents together to do it. The best way to start is to start with your long lead time process first. This is passports that need renewal. If your passport expires in the next 6 to 12 months, renew it because you need it to have a minimum of 6-month expiry when you apply in most countries. And God forbid it expires along the way because you get to start over. If you need birth certificates that need, or any certificates, birth or marriage certificates that need translation or that need certified copies, those are usually going to take longer. So plan for that. FBI checks, those usually take anywhere between 6 and 12 weeks. So plan for that. Remember, though, that those expire, so don't request them too early, but also when you know you're kind of getting close to thinking about applying, that's when you're going to want to get those documents. The short lead time documents can come later, your bank statements, your savings certificates, etc. But especially your passport and especially things that have to get an apostille or otherwise be translated, those are going to be longer lead times. I want to quickly tie in. Last week, we talked about what you can DIY and what you can't. You can DIY the vast majority of this paperwork if you're organized. I did it. It's really, really not that hard, but there may be times where paying makes sense. For example, if you have a very complex family situation, or if you've lived in multiple places and need multiple background checks, that can be absolutely overwhelming. If you are overwhelmed and the delay cost is higher than the service cost, for example, if you're someone who is completely is not even type B, you're like type C, so far down the line on disorganized that it's going to be insane for you, it may make sense to pay somebody to help. You do have to always, got that? Always pay for document translations. Do not DIY translations. They are never going to be accepted. They must be the official translation. So pay for that, but you do not need to necessarily pay to gather the documents for yourself. You do actually need your birth certificate, but you don't have to request somebody to buy it for you because you're going to have to pay for it anyway. You don't need to pay somebody else $500 to get it for you. That's my mom did. My mom needed a copy of her birth certificate from Kentucky. And instead of just going to the Secretary of State's office, she literally paid somebody $150 to get her birth certificate. That cost, I think, $17. Pay the $17, save the rest for your move abroad fund. But if you need legal translation, all that kind of stuff, that you have to pay for. You're probably thinking, all right, Miss Dell, you've told me a bunch of shit to do. What am I supposed to do today? What am I doing right now? I want you to get your document runway sheet together. Either grab the Prepared as Fuck checklist, and that will help you get there, or you're going to create one for yourself. If you're creating for yourself, you need to make a table with the document that you need, who you requested from, whether or not it needs a apostille or translation, when does it expire, and your status. Even if you do not know your exact requirements right now, I would like you to write the first 10 rows using the buckets we described above. This is the common list that everybody needs. So things like passport, birth certificate, marriage certificate, background checks, proof of income, health insurance, etc. Start that. Then your real task for this week, whether or not you buy the Prepared as Fuck checklist or that you actually make your own checklist, I want you to pick one long lead time. If it's your passport and it expires in the next 12 months, do that this week. Start your passport application process so you get that back. If you don't have passports for your kids, start that, whatever that is. Otherwise, pick one that has a long lead time. That could be your certified birth certificate. That could be a marriage certificate. That could be potentially a background check if the timing makes sense. Do one. That's the point, getting started. If you do one this week, you can do another one another week, and then you're actually getting your momentum going, okay? And that's the whole point. Make sure that you're putting follow-up dates on your calendar. Again, if you don't have the Prepared as Fuck checklist, you can add it to your Google Calendar and say, oh no, I have to check the status of this, or a date where you're going to request the next item that you need. This is how this becomes real and how it becomes momentum of actually moving abroad. Because if you sit and just do one thing and then forget about it, then you're never going to get abroad. So I want to make sure that you have the right things in the right order and have everything ready to go so that in 6 months you're applying for your visa and you're not still sitting here going, oh shit, I haven't requested my passport yet. Next week, we're going to do the piece that most people avoid until it's too late, which is appointments and processing timelines. We need to plan around and make sure that we're not being surprised by them along the way, because if you have to have one, I'll tell you the story of what happened with us in Austria and the shit show that turned out with me trying to get an appointment with a 5-month-old, but don't get me started. We'll share that next week. All right, my friend, that's it for this week. I will see you on the next episode. All right, friend, that's it for this episode. Do your weekly task while it's fresh so you don't forget and it doesn't end up on your back burner. If this episode helped, follow the show, please, on whatever platform you're listening on, and share it on Instagram so other people can find it too. If you tag me at I am Miss Dell on Instagram, I'll repost and I'll probably hype you up in your DMs like the emotionally supportive menace that I am. I'll see you next week, friend.